Okay.
There we go.
So essentially, this is the Alcatraz area that our level designer has been blocking out. There's the guard tower, the bathrooms, and the barracks. And the idea is that this is going to be an area where you can come down and see the aircraft carrier that's kind of, basically docked, essentially. And then this area will be explorable to a very minor degree. We'll have an RTS version of this map as well for when we add on. After they finish this, they're going to go move on to San Francisco North. So essentially, we'll have an altered version that's not as populated per se, so you can come here and build as well. And the idea is like right now we're like in this area here for like the actual like little batteries they used to have there, and then you can go up, and it goes up here and around the corner, and this is going to be the main area. Let me just zoom out here. So we're like right here. We're coming up that little archway over here. Let me just kind of get over here a little bit faster. So again, we're aiming for roughly another 2 weeks for this level designers to be done with this area. Dimitri just finished the VFX and the stuff that he was working on, essentially for when he can move over now. So he's going to be helping out on this map, and Dimitri's going to be working on the main prison and where it's going to be where like most of the gameplay stuff occurs, of like being able to switch between different game modes and just explore the island from there. Because you're going to start inside of the actual jailhouse, prison house. And Cirque's augmented, basically, like they took control of the island in the book. It's the same thing for just generally, we're going to just kind of have that feedback loop of just showing like Cirque and just making them more of a character, making the island more of a character for our little hub shared thing. This is the officers' gardens and all that. They're going to be populating and filling all that in. Then you have the little, let me just zoom over here. You have the lighthouse. And then you actually have the jailhouse and the staircases, and then the burned down warden's house that we're going to be populating. And this will be where you actually start. So next week, ideally, I'll have the interior of the jailhouse to show. And that'll be where you would start in the main menu. Then you press tab or you press escape, and you'd be able to teleport around the different wings to basically be able to initiate pandemic, to go to the firing range. Because our idea is that we're going to use this court over here, where the inmates used to play, as a firing range, where you can also kind of go to just customize your weapons for the operator, and you can test weapons in that area. And then we're going to have the main house here, where we're thinking somewhere over here in this quadrant, basically, for the actual like pandemic mode, and just kind of starting off majority of the game modes, and then everything else is just ambience and just allowing you to explore. And the idea is that we're going to populate it so that way, like, Cirque has little, like, tent bases and stuff down here, and Bradley's and Abrams and other stuff down there. Then you can see the aircraft carrier docked over there, down there. And that's the general idea that we're going with for when it comes down to it. Here, let me make it bigger so you can actually see it. And essentially, yeah, that's in a nutshell. And Efren right now is just kind of going through and getting the broad strokes. Oh, that's awkward. I guess there's a little nook there where you can just kind of fall. But he's essentially getting the broad strokes and getting the level design all blocked out. So that way he can speed run getting the other assets in and the detail and everything else. And just making sure you can actually just kind of get around based off of how you'd actually get around the real world. And none of these buildings are going to be interiors. They're all going to be exteriors. Exterior and exterior. And that's generally how Alcatraz is coming together in terms of this new hub, per se, like Cirque main base of operations. Now, the next thing is what I was going to get into is the progress that we've had with the replication. So, if I load up let me go to the test, a little bit of RTS, and we're going to go to test maps, and we're going to go to, I'll do the fun stuff. So, we've been. You're gonna say?
Oh, I was just gonna say someone actually asked if you could go inside the buildings, and
no. The only thing you're able to go into is the main house, the main cell block, because that's the one that Cirque has come in, retrofitted, augmented for their purposes, and everything else is slowly but surely coming online. And the idea is that parade grounds is gonna kind of be like kind of where they're like bringing in like tents and modular facilities and vehicles and storage, and I would imagine, and Chris can kind of fill in here, is that using the cell houses as kind of like a temporary way station until they can construct and fabricate more up to snuff buildings and things that are outside in that parade grounds, because it's an easy staging ground and it's quarantined from the islands where basically the virus is going on. And we based it on the idea the same way of when San Francisco had its major earthquake in the early 2000s. They used the government, federal government, took over that building. That building. They took over the island. Yeah, in 89. They took over the island basically because they have that right to basically take it over as a staging ground and a way to basically like manage rescue efforts per se, because it wasn't affected by the earthquake. So we're using the same kind of precedent here to have it to where like, okay, Circus coming in, they have federal power to basically take that land, turn it into basically their base, and then essentially they're going to augment it and adjust it to the best of their ability, but then there's still going to be like facilities and modular tents and other things that they bring in and they set up in the grounds, and everything that's inside the jailhouse is just temporary housing and temporary locations is the idea for right now. So you'll see some people like actually like sleeping in the actual like jail cells and some of that stuff and whatnot, as they're just trying to bring the island online and just kind of get it to fit their very distinguished needs of what they need the island, the role, because obviously it wasn't intended for this scale of an operation. But anyhow, so we have essentially been working on a couple of things. One of the things that we've been working on is ensuring that we're going to be able to maintain a high amount of characters in a performant world. So alongside doing the other stuff we're gonna be showing, we've been essentially going in and stress testing 100 v 100. I think the 100 was 100 v 100, and then the other metric that we were testing was 500 v 500, and just kind of trying to figure.
I was thinking like. Oh, I was thinking it was, weren't you saying yesterday that it was like,
and essentially we've just been kind of going through and just doing profiling and just seeing like, okay, what systems do we need to optimize in the engine to ensure the fog of war, the unit count, the gameplay, the combat, all that it's firing at all calibers, it's performant, and we're testing early level replication and movement and figuring out basically what can we concede and cut corners on in terms of the amount of update loops, like the movement component, and what can we not. So this would be an example in the editor raw with like 100 and 100, so 100 circ, 100 infected, and we're running at around 72 frames per second. And the editor, everything's raw. So when you actually cook a build, your performance typically doubles or triples. Because again, like everything's loaded in raw, and you never want to use the engine as kind of like a benchmark of what you're going to get in a live cooked game. It's just a starting point. And then you have to do more investigation when you cook your game and you actually start to play test it. So the idea is that like this is 100 v 100 and we're just doing profiles and we're trying to figure out what can we optimize in the engine and tweak this time around to essentially make it to where it's more performant and we can get high amounts of enemies. Because again, ideally, we're aiming for 500 v 500, but we're going to settle for somewhere in between of 500 units. Right now, the game bottoms out at around 200 to 300, which is roughly what World War Z and a bunch of other games do. So we're trying to push that a little bit more, maintain the frame rates, and essentially make sure that we're not overloading the replication graphs. So you can see this is 1,000 units on the map, and we're getting 23 frames per second. And this is with already some of our optimizations. So if this was the engine out of the rip, you'd probably be getting 0 frames. So we've already done some tweaks to get it within an acceptable range. So this would be about 60 to 50 frames, maybe 80 frames in a cooked game, but that's still not acceptable. So it's one of those things where like we're benchmarking and trying to figure out like where can we concede and optimize and improve the line of sight, improve their perception system, and making sure that we're able to keep things where the unit counts, like when the combat's not operating, it's very performant, it's very, it's firing in all calibers. And then once we get that level and we get it supported in the replication, then we move on to combat and we layer it out and we splice it up. So I'll show you an example for those that are curious. We're not just sitting at the wall, just throwing stuff against the wall. So this would be an example of a basically a trace file. And the idea is that we analyze this and try and figure out like, oh, okay, like we can look at this and see like, okay, what are the most expensive aspects of our game? So when we ask you guys to save files, they send us a save file. This is what we do. We load your save file in the editor. We run a profile over 10, 20, 30 seconds. And that's how sometimes when you guys give us a really, really bad save file, and it basically is like horrible performance, we can take that save file, load it into our SDK, run a trace route, and then essentially from there figure out like, oh, these functions are too expensive at these moments. This combination with that combination is causing X, Y, and Z. So then like you can go down and you can go here and you can go here and be like, oh, the skeletal mesh animation blueprints their parallel evaluations are too expensive. You know, and this is something that I've been working on. This is an old debug session. I haven't done a new one yet. This is last night, like 3 a.m. when I was working on it. But the idea is that, like, you figure after I did my optimizations for the skeletal mesh in the last 24 hours, I have to rerun this in that map and then see how many milliseconds it's taking up and where can I concede and give and, you know, figure out the box that we're operating within. And yeah, I know it's a lot of crazy colors, and every game does this. Every game that you play has some kind of way of looking at the data that's being sent and then figuring out like, okay, like where can we, you know, optimize things per se. And here, I'll show you one more example before I move on. Yeah.
It was almost like a kaleidoscope.
Yeah, I guess that's a good example. So like you figure, here's another good example where it's like you can click here and you can click here and then I can go to tick and I can see that like, oh, the timer is expensive here. What are we running on the timer? And then I dump timers at that. And then I go back and I would type in a console command of dumping timers. And then I would do an audit of all the timers and figure out like when is it spiking, what's the correlation, backtrack it, find those functions, optimize them asynchronously, do stuff. You know, basically it's a constant heave and hoe of the red is your video card and the yellow is your CPU as the game thread. And this is generally some of the work that goes like right here. You can see like the character's movement component. And that's what I was telling you guys is really expensive. That's eating up maybe about 10 frames, 10 to 20 frames, give or take. I'm guessing that's 2.5 milliseconds. So it's one of those things where like that's something we're looking into is figuring out where we went into it this week thinking that we were going to put this off another week. And then Derek was doing the profiling for the Fog of War because we rewrote the perception system. We rewrote the way that characters see because the perception system built in the engine was not working. It wasn't scalable enough this time around. And we were like, fuck it. Let's not make the same problem all over again. Let's just fix it now, do it correctly. And then from there, we have a custom homegrown solution that we can improve, implement, tweak, and, you know, X, Y, and Z. And the only thing we kept from Epic's implementation of Seeing was the hearing, because theirs was really cheap. So, like, if I go into, like, where is it? If I go into top-down, you'll see, like, a little example where, like, you figure when units move, let's see. Oh, he must have turned off the debugging. Great. I can't show it now. I'd have to go to the C++ and recompile it. But the idea is there was a red-green line, and the idea is that we wrote a custom line of sight system, Fog of War system, that more tightly knit together with our current system and was a lot more performant, and it gave us motor control over the perception system, which is a little too heavy for an RTS game. And you can see right now we're getting 120 with our solution. We were getting that previously, but it was a cascading problem where like the more characters you added, it would deteriorate once you got over like say 50 to 100 characters. That's why you guys would get the issues where units wouldn't see each other, and units wouldn't respond, and units wouldn't shoot each other. That you guys got maybe a year ago, and then we managed to fix some of them by basically like increasing the budget. But then there were edge cases where they would still ignore or not target someone because the perception system just starts dropping calls when it runs out of memory allocation. It's like, oh, I'm going to see you now, but I'm not going to see you now. I'm going to see you now, but I'm not going to see you the next frame. And it would jump back and forth between those two, and that's why you guys would get that bug where units would be like, units wouldn't see them, they wouldn't go visible. It was because the Unreal Engine stock perception system was like, not my problem, bro. And basically the moment it went over the budget and there was no more resources left within like their pool per se. And we edited and we tweaked it and we optimized it. But it was one of those things where we just needed to rip the Band-Aid off and redo the perception system in our own, set. And then we kept the hearing, and we basically just made it to where we have a floodgate or a limiter where you can't like send a noise request. Like if you're firing an LMG or an SMG, the fire rate on those guns were so high that we were constantly spamming out, "Oh, I hear something. Oh, I hear something." So the idea was we spaced out those calls. We added a limiter or like a floodgate system for that, so where units can't constantly make noise on the world if they haven't moved a certain distance from their last location. And there's a minimum time engagement of a couple seconds. So then that way, like, because hearing in our game is like, "Oh, I hear something, I need to go investigate." But they're not going to attack you unless they can make a visual confirmation. So the hearing is in our game is meant to start the investigation, get you in the general area, and it doesn't need to be pinpoint to a centimeter. It doesn't need to be pinpoint to a couple of feet. It needs to get the infected or the AI into the area where you are, and then they need to search. They need to investigate, and that also brought down the cost. And that was the one aspect of the perception system we did leave online, is we kept their hearing because we didn't have any issues with that ever. And the next thing is basically I kind of covered those. I covered the new Fog of War system. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show the, I guess I'll go to player test because that's the easiest way to show it. Yeah.
Someone did ask, is that 10 to 20 frames for every character independently, or all those
as a whole
guys as a whole?
So the movement component generally is a constant cost per individual movement component, because we're talking a movement component that was made for 20, 30 units stock. Basically, the Unreal Engine is really made for like 20, 30 people stock. And then outside of that, you have to start making tweaks and optimizations and customizations and concessions that you make in terms of like maintaining the density of units, the quantity, but then you make concessions in the quality of their pathfinding, how often they do traces. You space out their traces. So like when you do a move query in like a Witcher, per se, you can just do the whole move query because there's like 10, 20, 30 guys at most. So you can do that whole query in one go. But when you have an RTS game and you have hundreds of units, then you can't do the same way of doing it. So you have to basically space those calls out, do the calculations over milliseconds instead of in that moment, because you have more to worry about and more overhead to worry about. And it's the same thing. The same thing relates to the movement component, where we have to go into the code that Epic's written and basically optimize it and make sure that what we do doesn't cause desyncs. Because what we did in the single player is not going to carry over seamlessly to the multiplayer, because what we were doing in legacy CPs, we were adjusting the tick rates of the movement components based off of LOD. That doesn't work anymore based off of this new situation. So we have to engineer a new solution for how to optimize the movement component going into round 2 of implementing co-op. So then that way it's able to not work off of LOD, because now there's multiple players. You can't do that anymore. And you have to worry about if you start adjusting the tick rates of the frequency of updates for characters, you can have desyncs where, let's say, player 1 is lagging and player 2 is perfect ping, high FPS. The RPCs or the server calls will go to different clients at different times, or sometimes they might get dropped. And in that instance, you get rubber banding, you get teleporting, you get desynchronizations where one unit is here in one client and to another location in another client. So these are things that we're cognitive of, and we're researching and looking at how other games have solved it, like StarCraft, like Total War, like Stormgate. But Stormgate had a GDC talk on this and how they solved it for they're the only other Unreal Engine game that supports multiplayer for RTS, as far as I know, in the Unreal Engine. So they're a big one that we're looking at, of like how they do their motion graphs and their flowcharts. So we're looking into that right now to make sure that when we do have our play tests in a couple of weeks, it's not going to just be like units desyncing because we had to make those concessions for optimization. But again, we'll keep you guys informed as we're going through the loops of just getting everything situated. So essentially, one of the things that I had to kind of backtrack this last week to make sure that desynchronization in terms of the inventory, the weapons, and optimization, because when I did the animation blueprint updates last night, I had to rework basically how we do our anim graphs. anim graphs are basically essentially in a game engine or Unreal Engine, how animations are layered and set up and everything else. And we basically went back and that what do you call that? That trace optimization is basically the issue is that basically how we were doing some of our anagraphs in the debugging testing stages were needed to be carried down to a C++ level. So we ended up basically going through, or I did last night, and migrating over all of the code to delegates and function calls and bools and basically optimizing, hyper optimizing our animation blueprints and how our animations work by essentially just kind of going through and just doing this, where you basically just bind events essentially of like, okay, look, when the camera changes, make sure that the animation blueprint sees the camera change so it knows to switch the arms from the right side to the left side, or little stuff like that, where instead of checking every tick, you in the update animation, which is a lot of people do for like very simple games, you outsource that to delegates and you do event-based updates. So then that way it's never just checking every second. Do I need to do something right now? Do I need to do something right now? So again, there's like 2 sections that we still need to merge over, where it's basically just the IK that Michael needs to finish prototyping, which is based off of LOD, and then the aim tilt, where like the upper bodies and the operators tilt. And then I went through and I basically hyper optimized the non-infected animation blueprint. So then that way it did the same thing, and theirs is a hell of a lot simpler. Like you'll notice that their event graph is like there's one thing, which is the IK, and their event graph is empty. For game designers or aspiring game designers, they'll be like, what the fuck, how'd they do this? But again, we're running everything off of the C++ via delegates, event bindings and everything, because that's the cheapest, most effective way. And it cuts down that update parallel animation blueprint cost that you saw. So that was a lot of the work that I did in the last 24 to 48 hours. It's kind of boring and mundane, but it's one of those things that you have to do. And then tomorrow going into tonight, I have to do the infected. And then I have to do some polish passes for the operator for some bugs that I created by implementing delegates that I did. But anyhow, let me get on to the things that are actually a little more visually stimulating. What are we going to say, Duravar?
I think I can go out on a limb here and say it's never boring and mundane when you explain programming, because I don't know. I personally find it all very
I know, but
interesting.
sometimes I know some people can be like, I talk overly technical, and I'm sure it annoys people. So it's one of those things where I try and like limit it to a certain degree. But it's unavoidable when like we're in this early stage. I just want to make sure we're transparent in terms of explaining the issues that we're running into and why we make certain decisions. And I think that when people are armed with that information, they'll be a little bit more like understanding of what's going on and what kind of issues you run into as a game dev, even if they want to make a game in the future themselves. Because anyone can make a game nowadays of the technology that's available to us. We're all self-taught typically on our team. So one of the things that I did over this week was setting up the buildings. And I went in and I set up the barracks and I set up the ammo tent. And the idea is that I wanted to make it this time around where it was highly performant and we didn't do overlap checks. We didn't do like anything crazy in terms of like a lot of traces. Basically, I wanted to make it to where it was an asynchronous thread that did a very simple non-squared distance check amongst allied units. So that way, if you had a civilian group that was allied with you, if you have another player that's allied with you, like operators, they're all in the same faction. If they're allied in any capacity, your barracks and your ammo tent can supply resources to them. And I wanted to make sure I wrote that this time around very efficiently, very cleanly, and easy to maintain and update for newer currencies in the game in the future. So what I'm going to show right now is that in this corner is a pain-causing volume. It's very stock in the engine. Anyone can use it. And you can see now my character is wounded. And if I go over to the medical tent over here, it will heal them. And the idea is this works for RTS and it works for TPS. TPS being third-person shooter mode, RTS being the game you guys have grown accustomed to over the last couple of years. And the idea was I just set it up and got everything replicated and configured. The only thing I still have to do is add a little health bar that appears over people's heads when they're getting ammo and healing. So that was something that I was going to do and polish And then I was going to add it to where when you're in the operator and you walk within the radius draws. So you can see, oh, I'm in the radius. I'm going to get ammo. I'm going to get health. I'm going to get infection healing next tick. And then when you leave the radius, it would disappear. When you're in RTS, if you select said building, then it will show it. So then that way, it's the best of all worlds, where the RTS players and the operator players are essentially getting like all the visual feedback information they need of like, oh, that's my radius for if I need to move a unit into. Oh, I'm in the radius now as the operator. I'm going to get healed next time that the code runs around and heals me, essentially. And one of the other things that we did was, here, let me shoot my gun. I need to empty my bullets. And one of the other things that we set up was basically just the barracks resupplying ammo. So you'll see that when I enter its radius, it does the same thing it does in Legacy Cepheus. It regenerates your ammo. And essentially, I just set that up, replicated it, and that's on a client. Servers on the left were listen server. Because again, we're going off of the environment of listen server like the Forest, where you're in their world, you're in their environment, and then basically you have other clients that join when your session's live. And essentially, I set that up, and that basically just allowed us a very easy modular way where we can add that actor component to a vehicle like the Bradley. We can add it to people, and the idea would be is that it can give proximity ammo to people in a radius based off of an interval, how much ammo to get, and how much supply there is. And I also solved it this time around is there's a supply cost for ammo. So when that barracks, this barracks is going to be unlimited for soldiers, but the idea is for the ammo crate that's the medical tent. But when I add in the ammo crate, the idea is that like the ammo tent, you can't just build a MRS, 6 of them, 5 of them, 4 of them, and then go to town. There's going to be a resupply at that ammo tent, and you're going to have an investment of money that you spend to basically have it, because right now it's just you build 3 or 4 MRSs and you just fire for the next 30 minutes and you delete everyone on the map. That ain't happening anymore. So this time around, I'm solving that from the onset of these actor components that we've created that are modular and can be added to any character, any building, anything in the world, will support a cost of resupply. And you'll have to actually, like, there'll be a UI where if it's on that actor where it requires a resupply, you can click on it and then you can toggle auto resupply, or you can do it manually. And the idea is in that way, it would solve the issue of the MRSs just being godlike units that just have unlimited ammo and just wail on the entire map for 30, 20 minutes and you're done. So that issue is solved. And when we get to that point of implementing the vehicles and the chaos vehicles and all this stuff in the coming weeks, then you'll be able to see that, give us our feedback, figure out is it too expensive, is it too cheap, and we'll kind of alliterate from there. So that's one of the other things that I did. The other thing that I set up for RTS and TPS was the infection system, and that was a thing that kicked my ass and took quite a while this week in terms of basically setting it up so that way you could infect yourself. So here, let me type in the console command. There we go. So I'm going to infect myself. And then I'm going to go over here to the host. There's no UI set up for it yet. But if I go to the output log, if it's not going to freeze, let's see. Oh, did I even type in the... Oh, right. I forgot to set the level. I'm stupid. Sorry. So when you get infected in Cepheus, we had 5 levels. And the idea was that the level of severity dictates how quickly you're going to turn. And as you got, the major change that we're doing with this revamp, this redo, is essentially we're making it to where when you get hit by an infected that had a melee weapon, you're not going to get infection damage. You have to be gnawed, scratched, like slapped with like an actual like physical contact. So if you see an infected and they have a melee weapon, it's not going to apply infection damage. It's going to go straight for health. But when they hit you with their hands, or they kick you or stuff like that, that's going to apply infection damage. And as you get infection damage, it's going to increase your infection level. And as you get that, it's going to basically make it to where essentially you will turn faster. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simulate that the client just basically got infected at a level 5 infection. So that would be Chelsea slapping you. Because Chelsea slapping you right now in Legacy is about a 3 to 5, and then every time she hits you, it jumps. Because again, the idea was that she was supposed to be like wrecking you in. So if I do 5, you'll notice that the infection level on the client and the server is now updating. When she hits 0, she's going to turn. And basically, she'll turn for all clients. So because I had that debug, which I forgot about, because again, I was working all night last night, so I'm kind of slow right now, I apologize, is when she hits 0, which in the sake of time, I'm going to speed up time. And then I'm going to slow it down when she gets to 2. And then she'll turn. And she'll play the turning animation. And it'll work for RTS, it'll work for TPS. And the idea is once they turn, an AI controller immediately spawns, possesses them, and they go rabid, and they try and kill everyone. And they're a super unit, effectively. If one of your operators turn in RTS or TPS, they're a unit that has a higher bullet resistance, and essentially, like, you know, they're going to fuck you up. And right now, obviously, they're not going to charge me because we haven't implemented the combat AI. We're doing that going into next week as we get more of these rudimentary basic systems implemented. But I can shoot her now. So now she's dead. And when they die, it automatically kicks you into spectator. So you can be like, oh, wow, okay, I died. I got infected. My person's now going to kill everyone. I'm going to sit there and watch them mow people down. Now, we haven't gotten to the point of the operator of setting up the respawn system. That hasn't been a priority. We're going to try and do that before we have our first major playtest with developers going into next Friday, ideally. And the idea is that when the operator dies, you just pull out from a God's eye view, you choose a barracks, and you spawn in the next reinforcement wave, and you buy back in if you're playing in the TPS. Or you'll have an option to immediately transition back to RTS. So you'll get like a little menu that pops up. It's going to say respawn or switch to RTS. And then it'll allow you to switch to RTS because you're done fucked up and you died. Or you can go switch, or you can say respawn is TPS or whatever we're going to call it. And then you would zoom out like in Battlefield, choose the barracks, wait for your deployment window, parachute in, rinse and repeat of whatever you were doing in gameplay. And that's generally the gameplay loop that we're going in for the operators of respawning and dying and all that stuff. Now, Duravar came up with an ingenious idea last night. Well, he was saying, why don't we be a dick? Why don't we make it to where there's an option for an operator where you can turn on hardcore operator mode. And if you die, your character gets deleted. Their level, their weapon progress, their name. Obviously, you'd keep like their cosmetics, like their visuals, like we have different skins or whatever. But the idea is that was one thing that Duravar threw in last night when I was showing him this in preparation for today's podcast. And he was like, let's add in a hardcore mode. And I was like, damn, you're a dick. I'm not putting that in initially. What are you going to say? But like, that would be cool cruel. For people that want to play like realism, like they like, you know, like they're all, because again, it's going to get to a point in the next couple of weeks where there's like, we'll be able to focus a little bit more time on the operator side of things and make it to where they can build and make it to where they have better interaction with the RTS elements of the gameplay. So then that way they're not like a gimmick, and that they, you know, you can do things actually in both. So then that way you can have people in operator that have an ability to build, and then they can build stuff. So then at that point, you know, you get like everything you're looking for in terms of the operator cohesion to the RTS. And when you're an operator, you can actually build stuff and you don't need an engineer. And then you can just be like, hey, bring in this barracks, put it right here, walk up to the barracks, get the recruit window, build some guys, put them in a squad, issue them orders in TPS, or pop out, go to RTS, issue them orders, go back into TPS, and then do whatever you were doing. And we want to give people that amount of like freedom and, you know, to be able to like choose how they play the game per se, and then bring in their friends, and then they can kind of fit roles per se. So beyond that, let me bounce out. And yeah.
I will say I love what Dragnetta has said here. In hardcore, it's never did you get bit. It's sorry I shot your mate.
That's going to be the other interesting thing is because there's no virus. Operators will know they're infected. They'll know their infection level. They'll know how much. They'll generally have a gauge how much time they're going to have, and that's going to be something that we're going to have to QA test and play test because I want to make the virus a living, breathing threat, whether it be for RTS or whether it be for TPS. And it's one of those things where like we're going to have to balance that and give it the community and just kind of find a balance where it's like, okay, like I'm infected, I'm screwed. I need to at least help my team get back that's not infected, and then go shoot myself, jump in the river, kill myself, whatever, or just run it out until you get infected, and then let someone know, hey, you're gonna have to shoot me in 3 seconds because I'm about to turn, kind of deal. And then they respawn, they're good. What are you gonna say?
I will say it's like if that's ever the case when
You're
you and
gonna
I are
shoot
playing
me every
together,
time,
Rob,
you dick.
I don't think it'll ever be a question.
Thanks.
I won't even wait for a response. It's like, did you get infected? Yeah, bang.
But
Where were you? In the
Jesus
infected zone.
Christ.
Bang.
I'm scared of playing with him. But okay, so one of the other things that I set up was in Legacy, Cepheus, in RTS, and not in TPS, but now in both, you would have it to where when you got infected, if you walked in the radius of a medical tent, you would essentially get cured. It would counteract the virus, essentially. So then that way, until you left the radius, they were like triaging you, treating you, trying to heal you. So if I walk in the radius, you're going to see that basically it's going to stop the virus infection, and it's going to heal me. So it's bringing the current infection amount up to 100. Then once I leave, the current infection is going to go back down. And the idea is that they're triaging you, they're slowing it down, they're using drugs, they're doing different applications to basically stall out your life. And I'm at infection level 5. So theoretically, if I leave the radius of this medical tent in multiplayer, it's going to start back up again. So the idea is that the medics can do this, the medical tent does this, and the idea is it essentially allows you to counteract the virus inside yourself until basically you can do whatever you need to do. Like you could jump between these way stations if you really want to keep an operator alive for, like, let's say the hardcore mode. I think long term, we're going to have some kind of research for the DNA to cure it in late game. But for right now, it's just going to be a persistent thing of a meter that you're going to have to fight. Where once you get infected, it's a ticking time bomb, and eventually you're going to die. You're going to succumb to it, and that you're going to have to use these way stations to heal yourself and counteract level 5 infection if you get to that level. I mean, ideally, when someone melees you, you get like 1 or 2. You have to really get wailed on to get 3 to 5. That's like 40 to like 100 points of infection damage, and each melee infection hit is like every hit that someone hits you is like generally 5 or 10. A Chelsea is like a 50 to 100 infection damage. So again, it's going to be like a constant. It's going to be a balance where we're going to have to like QA test it, but that's our evolution from what we had in Legacy Cepheus, and then making sure that it works in both the RTS and the TPS, and that your infection level is like you're countering, you're battling these meters basically. So there's that, and then let me check my notes. Let me go over here. Yeah.
Whenever I think of, all you're doing is prolonging the infection state by walking into the medical tent, all I can think of right now is that meme I saw of "There's nothing wrong with you that an expensive operation can't prolong."
Oh, that's what I gotta show. So I don't think I showed this last week. Maybe it will be a rehash, but hopefully not. I'm gonna go to the top-down example map. I'm gonna bring it up in multiplayer. I'm going to go half and half, and then we can open up for questions soon. So, in this map, I know it's really rudimentary, but I just wanted to show that we were doing it, and we were adding other abilities. Right now, as I mentioned previously, we were doing, like, different subsections of aspects of the game, the layers. Before we scale up, we were doing, like, 1 or 2 abilities of this, 1 or 2 of that, 1 or 2 of this, like the resupply, like the weapons. And setting it up to where, like, now we have the Assaultant. So the Assault is like our first little test bed of like an RTS unit. So we got him in, we got him set up, we set up his metadata, we set up his data assets for his weapons, for his character class. We set up the asynchronous loading. And, we got it so, like, the flashlight turns on and it's replicated. And, if you hit it on the other client, basically, he's not selected, I'm stupid. It will generalize it. So, like, if more people have their flashlights on, then it'll turn it off, and vice versa. So then that way, like, yeah, I guess you can get that player dick that's like, I'm going to turn your flashlights on and off randomly to piss you off. But that's why you would go to control mode and dick them back. by changing the ownership to ownership, and then they can't run commands on your units if they're getting that annoying. So you do have an option for like a recourse of like if someone's abusing the system, you can step in or have the host step in and be like, yeah, you're being annoying. I'm gonna just take away your controller units and just give you 2 units, and you can go in the corner. And then we basically set up a debug where if I press the minus key, they shoot their gun, and then if I press the reload. Oh, hold on. That's weird. I guess it's bugging out. Okay, I guess there's some kind of bug there we have to look into. But the reload does work. The ammo does change. I'm going to have to look into that one. But you figure we got the reload in. We'll have to look into that. We got the switch weapons. So if I press that, they go to their pistol. And that's replicated for all clients. So like if they had their combat AI in, they'd switch and shoot the infected in front of them. So we got all of that situated, and we were just basically just testing everything and making sure everything works. If you switch weapons with the pistol, it'll automatically replicate and use the proper flashlight settings and change the location. You guys already saw the abort, so there's no reason to bore you guys with that. That all working, and you figure the flashlight automatically, they point in their direction. They do all that. It's all replicated. And we're basically just field testing before we scale up still, because we don't want to just rush into it and then figure out that we didn't test this enough, we didn't extend this system enough, we didn't add enough attention to detail to these layers of how we do command abilities. Because one of the things that I have to do going into this next week is do the R&D for the movement component like we talked about and I showed you guys previously, and then I have to move in the structures, and I got to add the engineer, and then I got to set up his system or his data asset-based system for replicating and asynchronously loading, and then have the socks, and then have the circ tent, and have the barracks and the motor pool. Even if you can't build units off of them, they need to be set up, they need to be replicated, they need to be working. So that's something that I'm going to be working on later in the week after I figure out how we're going to replicate the movement component. And then you'll notice that if I double-click, they don't run right now. That's something that Derek's going to be working on going into the next week, is the formation system, and tweaking and cleaning that up. Based off of our first pass of it, is basically there's a rudimentary formation system, but I feel like it still needs a little more work. The rotate the place, the arrow is there, but they don't actually respect it. So it's that kind of stuff of making sure that the rotate the place is working, getting the formation system tweaked up and ironed up going into next week. He has another day or so of tweaking and doing some minor tweaks to replicate the new Fog of War to make sure everything's working and there's no bugs there. And then, I mentioned, the movement component for me. And then once I get the movement component situated, I'm moving on to building the structures. Yes, I know someone keeps mentioning it to me every day. I'm going to be putting it in this time around so you can place gates independently of the walls. Because me and Chris have been fiending Age of Empires. I've been feeding RTS games with Chris. We've been playing literally an RTS game almost every day as we're working on this rebuild. To basically, refresh ourselves, make sure that we're looking at the newest games, seeing how they do some things. What? Halo Wars. We were playing Halo Wars. We were playing Age of Empires 4. We were playing Sins of a Solar Empire 2. Yeah, so we were playing those games and just kind of having some fun, talking about it, and figuring out what we need to change and just kind of improve this time around, the details panel. That when I select little Timmy and it has this, and we have a better design. And right now that's a low priority, but when we get to the time of updating the UI, we're going to give the details panel a little bit of a tune-up for weapon resistances and showing their current weapons and showing their infection level and whatnot. So you'll see that get squeezed in the next week or two, and kind of an update to that, and then having the health bar above them and having the infection level, having their weapons, because I just got it in last night to where the RTS units have their weapon and their kit loadouts via the metadata class. So right now the assault barely, starts with the M4, starts with the Glock, and we made this small little distinction there where you can actually see the Glock. Yeah, I know it's not in the holster. Michael needs to go back and adjust the socket for the operators. Not the operators, the assaults. So I just barely got this in, tweaked it in. I have to throw it to Michael. He's gonna have to go in and do that. Long term, maybe we get to the point of having equip and de-equip animation, but for right now, it's gonna be kept as a switch, just to keep it simple and basic like this, where it flips immediately and the gun just gets stowed like in Metal Gear, or it just kind of goes over his shoulder like a strap per se. So that's the direction that we're kind of going into right now, for just to be able to rapid fire get all this gameplay mechanics in, not to spend too much time on the animation switching system. Trying to think what else was there to show. So there was that. I mean, I would say we got quite a bit done. I was hoping to get to the structures this week, but I kind of got sidelined by the optimization and the animation budgeter and re-implementing that and just making sure everything was functioning. So it was a necessary change. And then the currency has been replicated. I'll be able to show that. Let's see. Let me see if I can show that now. Can I? Hold on. What's the... let me double check this. Okay. Hold on. Let me check one thing. I'm just checking something right now. Oh, okay. That's how I do it. I was checking some documentation my programmer left for me. So if I go to split and I go to money mode, then if we were getting a currency, I could basically send money to other players, and he could send money to me. And on Steam, on Epic, it would just show your username. It would just grab whatever username, and then you could basically send money between each other. When you're in, I don't trust you, I'm going to basically limit how much money you get. Is in split distribution, which we'll have more to show once we implement the socks. Everything's split. So every money you get goes 3 or 4 or 2 ways evenly. And then in open mode, it basically just goes to everyone, like in the global pool, the same way that you've grown accustomed to. And then up here, it would just, when you split it, it takes all your money and gives it to the host. And then the host has to basically decipher and break it up, per se. So, I mean, if you're switching the game to split mode, it's because you done fucked up. Someone's being a dick. And obviously the host feels like he has to basically be the adult, jump in, change the setting, distribute money out, and basically be like, okay, you're going to get 500, you're getting 1,000, you're getting 20,000 for that push we're doing in 5 minutes. And that's the general idea, is to have it to where if you need to enact that in a public game, in a private game, and basically essentially like divvy it up, you can. We're going to have the same thing for DNA, where you can gift it and kind of set all that up. Yes, the frame rate's spiking because I have the engine minimized. That's not our game. That's just because the renderer is not having a focus. So that's one of the things that we did. I didn't show that off too well last week, but that was something that kind of snuck in last week just to make sure that we had the money system situated. And that will set the foundation for DNA, and it'll be done the same way. Let me see. Let me check my notes. Is there anything I'm missing, Durvar?
I think that's actually covered everything that we talked about like last night.
Yeah, go.
So I was just thinking we might give.
Chris needs to talk a little bit more about what he did because it was intermittent earlier. So you might need to just repeat it like super quick, and then we can go into questions. One thing that I was going to, I guess I can show it, is really quickly I will show our new damage resistance system. Technically, I worked on that too. So we wanted to do a more table-based damage resistance system instead of doing the old system that we did. So that way you can export them into a Excel sheet. So like in this example, every time someone takes damage, they go through this sheet, and it allows the Michael and a modder in the future to be able to change and essentially like change the damage tables. So then that way you could be like, oh, when the AA-12 hits an spitter, it does normal damage. When the AA-12 hits a blow-up guy, it reduces the damage by 20%. When it does a standard, it does 1.0. Now, these numbers are just really quick test values. And no one's gone in and actually balanced these. These are not representative of what's legacy CP. This is just a really quick mock-up that I created so Michael could go in and do his thing. And every weapon basically has one of those. And then every damage type has a, an infection damage. Where like, yeah, anyone could go in, like a modder could go in the future and basically make it to where the KSG applies infection damage. So, you can make an airstrike apply infection damage. Because long term, we want to make the game moddable. We want to make it to where we can have unique doctrines where you can weaponize the virus against civilians, against other people, where you can use like a certain type of weapon, certain types of ammo, certain airstrikes, like a chemical gas that converts people. So that way, people that want to play an Umbrella can. And by programming it this time around from a fundamental like standpoint of like, look, any weapon can do infection damage, not just an infected via a very small subset of code that is not modular and cannot be extended out to anyone. Now I can go in and I can make the AA-12 operator gun do 5 infection damage, and now when I shoot a civilian, he's gonna start to turn. You're gonna see that on rep go, where like it starts updating their infection level, and then they'll succumb. Is the idea. I'm going to reset that because then we probably wouldn't find that out for a while why random people are being turned. But the idea would be is that you can go in and you can change that on any one. So if I go to like the the infected folder, and I go to weapons, and then you can see right here's the melee damage type. And you can see it does 10 infection damage by default. So every time you get hit by an infected, it passes that number through. And again, this is moddable. So the idea would be is when we implement modding in the not near future, but I'm going to say at least in the next couple of years, when the game is more solidified and we're ready to do an SDK and we get our license agreement with Epic, because I think we have to do a special agreement with them before we do modding. So I've talked to them before, and they were like, we had to do that. So we have to contact Epic, get whatever contract signed with them, and then basically release the SDK. And essentially, it would be you can go here, you could type this in, and you could basically override this. So then that way we'd have an override system where you can create a duplicate, rename it for your mod, package it in another file, and then have it to where when you load the game, it does like a search to figure out there's an override, and it would apply that override. So you can make like a KSG mod that applies infection damage. I don't know. It'd be whatever people want to do, because people can do whatever they want when they mod. I don't care. They can add Teletubbies if they really want to. So I played that Left 4 Dead mod where it adds Teletubbies that run after you. It's so adorable. And then the other one that turns the standard infected into Velociraptors. It's so funny.
I've genuinely never played a modded version of. I've actually probably only ever played 2 minutes of Left 4 Dead.
And then this is our.
Never really played.
I hate you.
I never really liked it. Never really liked Left 4 Dead.
No comment. No comment. So you figure, basically, one thing we're also doing this time around is we're fixing our hard references. Essentially, so when we spawned in an assault previously, we would reference the assault class directly, and that would make it to where you guys would get hitches when you basically would open up the window, the recruit, the civilian evacuation window, any kind of UI window. If you would notice a frame rate dip whenever you opened it the first time in 20 to 30 seconds, it was because of hard references. So this time around, we're using a lot of front load data assets, kind of like how Cyberpunk has such large save files that they have a data asset that loads metadata for the actual save file. And we kind of first discovered that by looking at Cyberpunk save files, and we were like, wait, they have a data asset for their save file, so you don't have to spend 10 seconds loading a save file that it might not even load. So you take the most pertinent information and you front load that, like the 4 or 5 variables, the 2D or bytes of information over megabytes, and that makes it to where that makes all the difference in terms of when you're switching to a weapon window, when you're doing like little things like that. I mean, when you have to load the skeletal mesh, you load the skeletal mesh. But that was something else that we learned the hard way, is basically setting that up and having it to where like we would load, like if we want to spawn this weapon in the weapon widget for like this, like changing out your weapon, we would asynchronously load this asset, and then basically we'd be like, okay, what's the weapon art? What's the, it's not mathed yet, because again, I said I barely put this in yesterday, but, what's the image? What's the MO image? What's the name of it? What's the dev name? What's the description we display in the UI? What kind of range does it prefer? What's the price? What's the DNA price, if there is one? Is it a non-combat weapon like the DNA scanner? What kind of target priorities does it have? So here you would basically be like, oh, it likes spitters. It likes standard infected. That's a subsystem of a system for the combat that basically allows it to where it knows that when you have an M4, target standard infected. When you have a javelin, target heavy like juggernauts, blow up guys, worms, then go down based off of priority. And that's basically how it was in Legacy CP, and that will evolve and be improved this time around in terms of making it to where you can have a priority system that's baked into each weapon on a per basis that is configured by the designers. So then that way you get the most bang for your buck if you don't have to babysit units. Because that was a big criticism that we got early off. And that was one of the things that we wanted to do, was make it to where this time around, like units would basically, it would be replicated. And we that came in towards the end of last year. Then we just kind of tweaked it and improved it as we went. But anyhow, that's more of a nitty gritty of all the things we've been doing this week. It's kind of boring, I know. But it's one of those things where I just wanted to show and just kind of show what actually goes into a game and the different aspects of like they all have to interoperably just kind of operate, like to take damage to the redirection, all that fun stuff. But anyhow, Duravar, that's everything I got. Yeah, just do Chris's section and then we'll do questions, I guess. Sorry, Chris. I talk forever, Chris.
Yeah,
don't murder me, Chris.
Yeah,
just give
it
a quick drive by what you were talking about before, because it was intermittent, so people have no idea what you were saying earlier.
All right. So,
Well, I think
I'll go ahead.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about Natalie, were we?
Well, yeah, I was just giving a general update of the book, and then you asked a couple questions about Natalie. But I got chapter 7 done, going on to 8 next week. Like I said, it's going good, not as quick as I had anticipated. No real reason, other than it's just like kind of just working my way through the story. There's been I mentioned that there had been some retcons that I had to like do since the character is much more fleshed out, given this is a solo story. But I think it gives a lot more depth and insight to her personality and ultimately what's going to motivate her long term going forward once you start to introduce the survivalist faction as well as the police. But yeah, I can't really remember the rest of what I was talking about.
You were basically talking about how
so going on.
you essentially were having it to where you learned a lot since last time you wrote your last book, and you were applying that this time around of like applying.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's making it a little slower. Is I've gotten I went to college and did 2.5 years of just creative writing, and you learn a lot, and so I've been like really incorporating that a lot of those new elements into this book, and it saves a lot of time, and I think it's just better. I feel than like older stuff. So I think people who've read all the books will see the difference between the first Cepheus, the Pierce book versus like this book. And this is more to how I want like all my books going forward to be. It's just better detail, better characterization. There's still a couple more tricks I have to put in when I go back and do the first major edits.
Groovy. Yeah, I know, because like you figure I'm a big lore buff. What are you gonna say?
I think it's gonna be interesting to sort of read up on Natalie and whatnot. It's gonna be very interesting.
But so far, Pierce is my favorite, and Winters. But we'll see. I'm holding out because I was like, I wanted him to do Fenrir, and he was like, I want to do Natalie, and I was like, okay, you're fine. Like, hit it. Hit me with your best. Because I'm really, really like, I like Fenrir. I love them as a faction. So I'm really, really curious to see how this first book goes and just kind of give the first read soon in the coming weeks, whatever. And then we'll just kind of go from there. Because I know the next one is going to be Fenrir. And then, because Fenrir is the other major party that is alluded to in the first book. But then they're never really, like, there's not really much going on. Like, one of the lieutenants is an operator for them. They got turned by Chelsea. And that's all. And you don't even really know that. Oh, well
you
we've said that publicly in the past, so that's not that big of a spoiler. But it's one of those things where, like, I love background information, I love lore, so it's one of those things that's slowly but surely building a universe with Chris. So then that way we kind of have like a Bible and like a system to build from when we get to the campaign. Because again, a big thing for me is getting out of these hurdles for the Q1. get all this core foundational rebuilds done. And then the next big milestone for us is supporting it and getting some bug fixes out for a couple of weeks or a month. And then we're going to go start working on the campaign. And that would be ideally sometime around the summer-ish. So we'd be like, okay, we're going to disappear for a couple months. We need to plan these systems out. We need to basically like go over the books, go over the lore, and that's going to be fun. And in some cases, go back out to San Francisco, take some pictures, explore some of the areas, nook and crannies, maybe get some more photos done for photogrammetry so we can get some like authentic, like, you know, of the items in. Because like that's one thing that Dimitri learned this time around is we know what we need now for good photogrammetry, for like how they did for Stalker. No, what was the game that came out recently? They did it. Sure.
Stalker
I
or
have it in my library.
Chernobyl?
I was playing it recently. They did it, and it was beautiful in that game. Stalker 2, where like
Stalker 2.
most of their games is photogrammetry. They just went to the actual environment and scanned it. Why not? You know, it cuts out 90% of the work, 80% of the work, and all you have to do is just clean it up and author it and optimize it. So it's one of those things where I'm looking very, very. I can't wait to get to that point where we can go back out there and do that and do it for like the statues and the signs and other small miscellaneous objects that are littered all over a city that for a team of our size would be impossible if we didn't just buy asset packs. So it's one of those things where why not just go back out there, spend $500 or whatever on the plane tickets and the board and all that, and take the pictures, and then come take pictures and videos, come back, put it into this program, spend a week or two converting thousands of assets or dozens of assets over hundreds of actors over this new system, and then import them into the engine and do all that. So it's going to be pretty cool. I can't wait till we get to that point. But anyhow, Derivar, if there's not anything else, I think we should open it up for questions. And there's one question I wanted to take right off the bat.
I think. Do you want to answer that before I ask?
Ask Chris's question. He needs to talk more. I talk too much.
All right. Something I am curious, Chris, about is the lore behind Alcatraz. Why was it chosen by Cirque?
Well, because Alcatraz was a federal prison, and so it's still part of the federal system right now. And like Robert had mentioned, how they actually used it in, I think, the '89 earthquake. And so Cirque has mandate over anything federal. And they could do civilian as well, but there's like a little bit more red tape with civilian. Like they can use the giant stadium as a mass evacuation point, but it's they are allowed to go in and do Alcatraz right away and effectively just do whatever they want, whatever they need to do. Especially because there's like various degrees of protocols, and like this protocol, given the severity of the virus, they know that they're destroying some historical landmarks, but it's better to destroy that than lose an entire city and millions of people.
I think it's quite interesting, honestly.
Like me to go into the question? Or do you have a follow-up? Okay, so
Yeah, I think
one of the
think
cats in the Discord chat, Stormcaller, asked, are there plans in the future to improve the sound effects of the game in terms of weapons? The distance when you move away from the area when there is shooting, etc. So I've actually talked to my audio engineer several times about this, and he's very gung-ho to jump in there and just redo everything. Because there have been massive developments to the audio engine with meta sounds and a couple other like modern implementations of like having like not Battlefield Call of Duty level because they use WYs, but pretty close, I would imagine, from what all the improvements they made, because Epic recently invested a lot of money into their sound engine. And that's something that we are kind of earmarking and saving, I would say, to offer co-op. I would say that that's one of the icings on the cake, where one of the things that I seek to do from the influx of the higher amount of revenue from the co-op is to be able to pay that guy substantially more monthly, the contractor, so that way he can go through and audit and redo and work with the programmers to implement better environmental storytelling in terms of the sound design. better like different sound fields based off of when you hear shell go, because like you figure it's not the same sound up close to where it is far away. There's different ways that sound disperses absorption. There's different things that a game engine simulates to make the crackling and the other things that you hear in today's modern games. So it's one of the things that I am going to do, and it's something that just it's a low priority right now. It's an icing on the cake kind of thing that I like. Again, once we have the budget to free up to allocate in that section, that's one of the things that I need to do. And it's going to be weapon sounds, it's going to be airstrikes, it's going to be atmospheric effects, like just generally across the board kind of deal, and the city ambient effects and whatnot. Because right now our current setting is just very rudimentary, very basic in terms of the shooting and the ambient city sounds and everything. And we'll keep pushing that, I would say, after co-op. Okay, what other question?
I think this person on YouTube, Luxury, has been waiting for a while. Any news about rework and PC
civilian factions, or what is he talking about? Because
probably the
if he's
police.
Talking about police and Natalie, that's not coming until 1.4 after co-op and around the same time as the campaign. Because technically, after we finish Q1 and everything is in, that's technically when we start 1.4. So that would be Pierce and Natalie. That'd be the campaign, and that'd be world events. So it just kind of comes down to we just need to keep on trucking, keep on moving, and when we implement the new doctrines in the coming weeks, when we implement the DNA research tree, and we re-implement Pandemic, we're doing it from what's in the roadmap. So then that way we don't have to go back and then go forward of like implementing an older system that was going to be torn out anyway. So that's we're working towards that, and I'm very conscious of that because you figure in the last poll that we had in December, everybody voted for Pierce and Natalie. They were actually in second place behind co-op. It was co-op number 1, and then it was Pierce and Natalie, and then it was the vehicle AI, and so on and so forth. So it's like we are very aware that is a big priority, and that's one of the other things that I'm waiting for after co-op, so that way we can have an influx of support, or I guess increased revenue from that, and I want to reinvest that into making sure that Pierce and Natalie is not just a gimmick, and that they have enough vehicles and enough unique units and gameplay elements to them to where they're not just an afterthought or it's just a reskinned dynamic civilian group, because that's garbage. The idea is they're supposed to be a level above the dynamic civilian groups, where like they're not like a full-fledged faction like the Cirque or like Infected, but they're like somewhere in between where they fill a role play wise that interacts with every system in the game, whether it be the civilians, the Cirque, and the Infected, and like the police and the ambulances and the fire trucks and all that is one wrapped up faction. And then you got the anarchists, which is basically, Natalie's group that Chris is writing his book for. So like you figure that's the vector we're going towards there. Let's see, another question, Durvar?
I think 1 second. Dragonetta asks, is there going to be a way to keep custom music playing in the player's own ears rather than it being a world sound?
Ears.
So I'd say probably just in general instead of just coming out of the speakers.
Oh, so you want that? I didn't know that was a request. Is that a popular? I've never actually heard that one before. I mean, I figured it'd be enough for the radio, but you want like the ability to have like your own music player in the game, like Stellaris, right? Is what you're advocating for? Like a Stellaris? Yeah.
I'm assuming so.
Where is that question? So I can follow.
It's how you were
Okay.
responding. It's just down from there.
Let me. GTA has a
GTA
radio,
do that
but they don't
too.
have it when you're outside of the car. I think. Let me think about that
Wow.
and see what that would entail, because that would entail us rewriting our music system, which we're going to we haven't even implemented the music system this time around. Like this right now, there's no combat music or ambient music that plays when you're in RTS like it does in Legacy. That's one of like the back end systems that we have to implement, regardless. Let me come back to you on that one. and let me talk to some programmers and see what that would entail. I don't have an answer on that, but it's not a bad idea. Next question.
Someone on YouTube critique. What about negative infection damage for cures?
I mean, there's no cure right now as it stands. In pandemic mode, I feel like we're going to have to implement one regardless when we get to actually like playtesting it and just kind of getting it in there for like the DNA research. Right now, you're kind of fucked. Once you're infected, it's just a ticking time bomb for your units, and all you can do is counteract it and triage it until it gets to a point where you have to put that unit down or kill yourself if you're an operator. Let's wait till we get to the DNA research in the next couple weeks because it's going to be basically the core stuff that we showed, and then it's going to be non-vehicle doctrines, and then it's going to be the vehicles, and then it's going to be DNA research, and then it's going to be pandemic. So when we get to DNA, bring that up again, because by then we should have already resumed some shape, manner, form of experimental builds in the next couple weeks. And that way you'll be able to play and actually give me actionable intel in terms of what you like and what you don't like. Because right now there's not enough in there to just put a build out. Like you just walk around for maybe 10, 20 seconds to get bored. So it was supposed to be this Friday, but we just didn't get enough done to make it like the building's not in, the sandbag's not in. There's still other rudimentary systems that aren't in. Ideally now we're aiming for next Friday to just see how this next week goes. And then if everything goes in, we'll get a playtest. And once we have a successful playtest, then we'll give it to you guys. And then we'll be able to start building from that for basically like other features as we add into the game. Yeah, back to you, Durvar.
Yep. Apotheosis. Are there plans to add more horror elements to the game?
Okay, Chris, you take this one.
Yeah, a lot of that just comes down to the size of our team, budget, but definitely what we had always planned from the start to be a lot more horrific and gory and less just generic city and basic people attacking you. So once we have the resources and more time, we'll definitely start implementing the
because one of the things is that you're getting a character artist that can redo, or not redo, but rather can, because standard infected and the bluff guy and all of them are fine, but we need to add more. We had more concepts that got done, and we just haven't had the budget and the character model that would work with us to basically like do that. Where we can do like some of like the gory monsters like Chelsea's Elite Guard, the sperm whale. Having better variations of the standard infected, because that's something Michael's going to work on, but he's not a character model by trade. So it'll be one of those things where there'll be a concession there of their gore porn or their deformities. Like if you look at Black Ops, you figure they look at how disgusting their infected look. So it's one of those things where it's like that's going to come in icing layers as we get available more resources. I feel like after co-op going into the campaign. And it'll be like us just kind of tightening the bolts of like, yeah, the standard infected and all of them look serviceable right now. And they're going to get a little bit better with this next uptick of modeling that Michael's going to be starting. But I'm still not going to be happy until we can reinvest that revenue in the future into like a dedicated character modeler that can go back and do some of the gory stuff. And then some of it being environmental storytelling. And then some of it being the better character modelers, and then some of it being the sound design and the atmosphere. Because horror is not just achieved by one, it's achieved by a cultivation, a combination of things. And until all of those things are firing on the right calibers, it's not going to feel scary. It's not going to feel like tense. Part of it's difficulty. You have to actually fear Chelsea and not think she's a joke. You actually have to fear getting into a combat encounter, and there has to actually be a repercussion of losing units. So it's kind of like a delicate balance that we're going to have to nuance and just kind of nurse as we go into this redo. And we'll do the parts that we can do now, and then we'll earmark the parts that we can't do going into the future as more resources become available to us and as we just keep on trucking. And plus, we're always learning new things on the team. Like you figure, like character modeling is new to Michael. Modeling is new to me, where it's like we're always learning new things and pushing ourselves to fill roles because we're an indie team. So we're a jack of all trades. We wear a lot of hats on the team. So it's one of those. It's also that as well, where it's like, Dimitri is a modeler, environmental artist by trade, but now he does Niagara, VFX, and a bunch of other stuff. And he just took that on by learning it and spending the time. So that's also an aspect of it. It's like, as time is free, people on their free time learn things, and we can also up the ante as well, working within the confines of our budget typically. So yeah, that's another thing that we're constantly always learning and basically innovating. Back to you, Durbar.
All fun and games until
Jesus.
on ya. God, I hate playing as operator and fucking having Chelsea just be around a corner or something
she
like
starts
that. You
whispering
hear her
to herself
panicking.
talking, whispering sweet nothings into your ear.
It's just like just whispering sweet nothings, and it's just like, do I go that way or do I just turn around?
And just don't go down that street? Because she does that in the Fog of War too, where you can find her in the Fog of War by moving the camera around. If you're really patient and there's not much ambient noise going on, you can actually hear her talking to herself. That was fun.
It's just it is creepy. I still remember to this day. I was playing Cepheus, and I was just chilling in the operator, running around, being a fool. And then I heard her talking to herself in the Fog of War, and I was like, I regret my choices. I regret my life decisions.
Which is one of those things. Okay, what other questions do we have?
Blue asks, is there any way to help development aside from financially?
No. I mean, because you figure I don't like volunteers, so you figure everyone just gets generally paid something at least alongside their day job. So it's one of those things where right now we don't have the ability to bring on anyone else based off of we work within our budget of how much we make on Steam and then how much people do outside the day job and how much they get paid off of the game. Even for myself, is very meager. But it's one of those things where we're here for the long term of getting everything done and getting it situated. And it's a long term investment of just building up the game, spending the time and everything else. So, I mean, right now, the only incentive is just basically Patreon or Discord or stuff like that of doing it. I don't know what else you could do. I mean, you can give advice and suggestions, but I don't know, Durvar. What do you guys think, Chris and Durvar?
I mean, spread the word.
Yeah, I mean, we want to spread the word, or we talk to a YouTuber. They talk because the YouTuber to talk to the game or cover us or whatever. That helps too. But I would say that it's one of those things where we're so limited. We haven't, the team size hasn't changed in 3 years. We're the same people working on the game in the last 3 years. So it's one of those things where we haven't been able to get larger or smaller based off of the amount we make on Steam and how much we all make in our day jobs. So it's one of those things where we're just working within our track set and just trying to do the best we have with the resources that are available to us. Yeah.
I think a big one too is reporting as many bugs.
But yeah, because right now it'd be wasting their time because it's a completely different code base, different game.
Yeah.
We're building an experimental, the new build. So it's one of those things where that's another thing. But again, I don't know. Anyway, yeah. What were you gonna say, Jeremiah?
I was just saying, it's just bug reports are incredibly helpful. Yeah. Not right now, obviously, but later on in the future when everything is set in stone,
that would be invaluable to help us out. But what were you saying for the next question?
The next question is just going down the list. For those of us who bought the game and supported the game before the rewrite, are we going to get any bonus content?
Wait, what is that question?
Dragneta, above the unicyclists parachuting in. Found the gif of the unicyclist, and then it's just above that one.
Unicyclist. What the hell is a unicyclist? Why do I not see this bike anywhere?
Yeah, it's a bike with one wheel. Do you not see them?
Thank you.
Have you scrolled all the way down to the bottom?
rewrite. I don't. I don't. I mean, we don't have the resources to do that right now. Maybe in the future when things calm down, but not right now. No, because like you figure, I mean, what you're getting.
I mean, even when the game is rewritten, they're getting a new update. So it's not
Yeah,
like
like
you
it's
have
the
to buy
same
it
game,
again.
just brand new doctrines, new DNA.
I mean, you just get an
Yeah.
update
Well, he's talking
when
about
you open
more of
Steam.
like a cosmetic, a skin, like a. I think he's talking something along those lines. I think. Yeah. Let me think about that. Because right now we're stretched so thin trying to get everything in as it stands. I don't think that's like a thing we can do right now. But I have thought about that.
Oh yeah, like something that's just like I know like your World of Warships
Well,
had
I
like
mean,
special
one thing that I
flags for
talk
like
about was
how long
that
you've
one
been
thing that I
playing.
haven't talked about, but something that I've thought about and I haven't really expressed publicly with you or Michael or anyone else is that anyone that was in the early access period before we released 1.0 should get something for when we leave early
Yeah.
access for the trials and tribulations of all the issues we've gone through. So to survive our early
Survived
access.
early
So
access.
that's
Oh my God.
something that I was
Yeah.
planning on doing, whether it be a skin or a cosmetic or something that is only they get. But ultimately, I don't know what that is yet. But that's going to be something that I formulate as we get into that section of about to leave the game. So that's what I was planning on.
Yeah, you still owe some our YouTubers some like. Remember, you had that
Yeah,
deal
I
of
know,
putting
and
some
we
of the
put them.
logos
I
in
gotta go grab their
into the
logos
game.
again because anyone that covered the game on YouTube was supposed to get their logos or their splash art put into the game randomly, their logo, their branding art. So it's one of those things where it's like I have to do that with this new rebrand, and then I have to basically. That's not a bad idea, but I think I would save that for when we leave early access. So then that way it'd be like, everyone just kind of gets some kind of incentive, some kind of item, visual, whatever. Like Spider Cat, because you figure, we wanted to do that for people that cover the game is put their art, their splash art. I mean, we contact them, we get their approval, they're okay to use their art, their copyright because it's their logo anyway. And then we'd basically just put it somewhere in the map, and they would know where it is, and they would be like, "Oh, cool! Like someone did some graffiti of my YouTube's logo." So it's free advertising for them, and it's our appreciation for them covering our game. Let me get back to you on that one. It's not a bad idea. I just don't have anything on that right now at this time. But let me mull that over, and I'll get back to you in a couple months at the end of Q1. Next question.
I'm not sure. I keep unsure about how to pronounce his first name.
Yeah.
Weiss. Anyway, when the new doctrine system is introduced, will we see walls that troops can be stationed on? Also, you mentioned a few weeks ago about hiring a media coordinator after go. Are you still planning to do that?
When it comes to the walls, yes, that is one of the object types is battlements. Where you could have it like Resident Evil, where they have like the Resident Evil 2 movie Apocalypse, I think it was, where they have little battlement things. That's one of the things that. So we took Dimitri off of doing. That's the one thing that's not done for a Cirque Doctrine because Efren needed the help because of the Los Angeles wildfires, where he was behind 2 or 3 weeks. He'll have to fit that in alongside doing the San Francisco stuff. He'll have to do that sometime after he finishes Alcatraz, after he helps Efren catch up. Then he'll do that and have that the show for the battlements and the tier 3 walls. So yes, that's going to be a thing. When it comes to the media coordinator, that's something that we're timing to do with the influx of players after the release of co-op. So it's one of those things where it's like a PR marketing kind of person just going to kind of be interfacing with the team, be on the public Discord, be on the development Discord, see all the information, and they would help us formulate these podcasts. And would basically just kind of help outreach on Reddit, Steam, Facebook, all the other fun places. Because to me, I get run. I fucked up yesterday. I didn't put the Steam post up. for this podcast and a bunch of other stuff because I was just doing programming all day to the point where like I went to sleep at like 3 or 4 a.m. and then there was no Steam posts of like what we did over the week. So now everyone has to come into the podcast and rewatch the VOD just to see, because again, I didn't have enough time to do everything because I was trying to get more programming done without the, yeah, it's a struggle, but it's just kind of like finding a balance for everything. So it's one of those things where that's something that I'm looking into doing, regardless of like when we get to the point of like when co-op is out, we have to use some of that extra money to hire someone that can do that and do it consistently, so I can focus more on the programming and the development side of things. But yeah, so that would be the answer there. Diravi, next one.
Turkey. Imperial Japan asks, regular power drop system
Well,
when?
That's how units come in already.
Yeah, but they have the wrong shoots. I think he's
Is that
talking
what
about
he's
like
talking
traditional airborne shoots.
Yeah, like all the stuff.
'Cause I've been saying that for a while. They're using like more skydiver shoots or special forces, not the straight
I'll
drop
talk to
shoots.
Dimitri about that. I think he did that because it would work for both the supply stuff and the other things. I don't know. Because Dimitri was the one that made that and animated it. That's
Yeah, because the way the ammo comes in is like that's how those soldiers should be dropping.
okay. I'll have to talk to Dimitri about that when we get to that point.
Don't,
That would
when you call them in, don't
they
also
come down in a
in
straight line because we were worried about air drift and making it to where units would basically like fall into the water or fall onto a rooftop. If we added some discrepancy of like real wind simulation, we didn't want to add that as a factor. Like for the operator, when you're controlling them, you can control the air control. Like you can control like where they land. But for the RTS, we wanted to keep that where strictly it was just, look, you're going to go straight down, you're going to land, and then you're going to do what you got to do. Because there were too many variables if we introduced air and all the other stuff. It would just be crazy for the amount of things that could go wrong. So that was more of like, yeah, it's realistic, but the world's too complicated to account for that. And it'd be even more of a cost to try and find and make sure that a unit always lands in an area that's hospitable to like movement. Like landing on a car versus landing on a rooftop, like kind of deal where you're just fucked. But anyhow, what were you going to say? What's the next thing?
The next thing is, how soon do you think we will actually have a co-op and more of experimental become stable? Hang on. I may have just not seen an announcement on it if there was one, but just curious because operators in co-op are two big refreshing
We are
things I am
hauling
waiting
ass to get it out by the end of March. And you figure there's always the possibility that it bleeds over. You guys will know weeks in advance if we're going to. Like by the middle of March to the beginning of March, we would generally know if we're going to bleed over a couple of weeks and how much we're going to bleed over. Right now, January was the foundation. That bled over a little bit into February because some systems that we thought were ready and done needed to be tweaked up and ironed out and battle tested a little bit more. So we're like behind like a week or two so far because they figure like cleaning up and just making sure everything's done correctly this time around. And right now, going into next week, it's going to be the buildings, the socks. It's going to be the buildings, the socks, the fog of war, the formation system, the patrol, the attack move, and then whatever else we can fit in that week, kind of deal. And then when I do the structures, then I'm going to be setting it up so you can click the barracks, you can click the motor pool, you won't be able to build units in the first build, and then a couple of days I'll pass it off to Derek. He'll bring over his UIs from Cepheus, and we'll make it to where you can recruit and buy ammo and all the other stuff. Well, the ammo already works, but you can at least change out the weapons and have the loadout systems and all that. So it's going to be a crazy next 1 to 2 weeks just to kind of get everything situated. So it's like the base level of like, you can spawn in, build a circ tent, build the barracks, build non-mechanized infantry, and be able to like, you know, customize their weapons, everything, all that. That's the first layer, is getting all of that back online. And then once all that's back online, then we would basically do the non-vehicle doctrine stuff, like the airstrikes and the like the abilities and all that stuff, get all that online. And then we're looking at the middle of February at that point. And then middle of February to end of February. And then the middle of February, end of February, then we would start the vehicles. We would do the vehicles, get them set up, get their unique abilities configured, add the abilities that we weren't able to do previously with this new system. And then we'd have another play test. And that would be on that co-op test map I showed previously. And then that would round out roughly around the end of February. And then if everything goes to plan, everything works out, we're going to divvy. Derek's going to go and do ground vehicles. I'm going to redo the helicopters from the ground up. And then, so that's when we split somewhere in the middle of the month. I go one way, he goes one way. And then whoever finishes first comes over and helps the other. And then at that point, it'd be a week, give or take, for the helicopters and for the ground vehicles, and collaborating where needed, because there's some codes that get shared, like multiple weapons being used independently of each other. So that'd be a week or so. We're looking at the end of February, and then there's gonna be some bleed over, and then ideally around March, we do Pandemic. We do a Pandemic Light map, which would basically be a slice of San Francisco North that would basically have all the systems in play that's unique to Pandemic. So the Chelsea AI system, the Crow system for, like, you can have the Crows movement initiate the virus instead of Chelsea. I haven't forgot about that. Prototyping the custom game options and making sure they're replicated. Doing dynamic civilian groups. Doing civilian evacuation. And that would be March. It's just those systems. And then whatever bleeds over. So that's the current plan as it stands. There's always going to be some bleed over, some things that get delayed. But again, we're aiming for the end of March. And
yeah, you guys are so slow, man. It's ridiculous. You know, it's like doing the job of 15 programmers. You gotta go quicker.
But it's one of those things where it's like, I think that we're making good pace based off of the things that we've learned over the years. I think that we're making sure that this time around we're building with a better foundation to where it's easier to add new content, like the resupply actors, where I can add that resupply actor component to anyone, instead of dynamic radius to anyone. And now I can make, like, the ammo runner supply ammo and radius instead of having to go up to each individual person, which was kind of weird. And it wasn't very effective based off of the loop of the game, basically, in terms of like how quick paced the game is. So it's stuff like that. Where this time around, we're thinking about just kind of getting more mileage out of the systems that we write, and reusability and modularity. I neglected to mention this, but one of the things that we have to do next week, going into the week after that, is we have to take our ability system and replicate that, and then do the grenade and the fire in the air as a test. And then once we get those two systems working, then that would be one of the things that we do to implement before we do all the abilities for the ground units. So, yeah, that's the basic list. I mean, there's also the mini map. There's like, there's the mini map. There's a Doctrines UI, and that'll be squeezed somewhere in between there. But Doctrines UI is simple compared to just adding the units into the game and doing the nuances in terms of like the passive stat changes that they do are pretty simple. Most of the stat changes for the Doctrines can be implemented and done probably in a matter of like 2 or 3 days. It's really just the new units and their combat AI that takes the most time, in the vehicles, which is why we earmarked the vehicles towards the end of February, because we know that in its own is going to bleed over. And the airstrikes are simple. Everything else in the Doctrine is simple. It's just the vehicles that's going to kick our asses. Because this time around, I want to make a proper helicopter AI that has a proper flying navigation mesh, and do some research into that, and write a custom recast nav actor, and just spend a little bit more time fundamentally building them so they understand their environment and they understand when to go up, down, left, and right. So they're not just running into a building and like sliding against it to get around the edge. It's just weird. You know, that kind of stuff. So that's part of also the foundation of making sure that like these systems are working correctly and that they don't do anything stupid. Another example would be is sometime in the next week or two, I found a line of code that was hidden in the navigation system that has an arbitrary limiter where, like, when you give a move order, it's limited to like 2,000 something. And we need to remove that, override it, and then test it, because then that would make it to where we don't need the move proxy actors. And theoretically, it would make move orders more expensive, but then all we would do is space out those move orders, do them in chunks instead of doing one long one, and just have like a memory where like it reissues it, but we don't have to have a level designer have an extra step of making a proxy actor. That's why the buses break on Calypso. That's why certain units don't know where the fuck to go sometimes, because essentially they hit this arbitrary limit in the engine of how far they're allowed to pathfind for optimization reasons, and then we tried to patch it by having a ferry system. The bridges use this, where the bridges have a system. Think of it as like leading the blind, where the idea is that they don't know where to go. So you move them to intermediate positions, and then when you get to that point, it recalculates the next point, and then it recalculates the next point. So the idea is we're ferrying AI across the map via this system, where it queries where you are and where you need to go, and then it gets intermediate points instead of doing the entire pathfinding in one go. But the problem is that you figure that was very like error prone, because then you would have to test every unique permutation from any point in the map, and it made it very, very hard for level designers to design the maps that they wanted to do. So we needed a system that was a little more intelligent to be able to be like, okay, we need to remove that restriction on how far they can pathfind. This is an RTS game, not a shooter like Unreal Tournament or Division or whatever, where like the pathfinding queries are very small in terms of how far they're moving. And we need to remove that limiter or increase it substantially and have a warning system where when it does reach that limit, it automatically would add a task, and it just works from the back end. So then that way we don't have to worry about it failing, them moving to a stupid location, and then we get people complaining, well, not complaining, it's valid complaints of the AI aren't going where they want them to go, they're going back and forth, that kind of stuff. So that's one of the other things that we're going to be fixing, and we're going to be investing some time into the next week or two to change that line of code and either do a system that adds it on to a what's the word? I'm stupid. It's like a queue. It'd be an internal queue that's managed at the AI level instead of at the level designer level, where we have to like put all these crazy proxy actors in the level. It would be like, hey, I know I need to go here and there. I'm over the Unreal Engine's limit of how far I can query a move. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go as far as I can in the AI, and then basically re-query it again. Or we'd go the route, this needs testing and benchmarking and performance testing, is just remove the limit altogether and then see how expensive it is based off of like just doing the query in one thing, and then test it against 50 units, 100 units, 200 units, 300 units, 500 units, and then figure out where the limitations are. And then from there, course correct, alter, optimize as needed to fit within the box of the game that we're making. So that's something else that we're going to be working on that's going to might adjust the timeline a little bit here, but these are all things that we've identified based off of your criticisms, your feedback over the years. We don't read the Steam reviews and be like, fuck that guy, we got his money, let's go run to the bank. That's not what we think. That's not.
Wait, we don't.
Shut up.
Are you sure?
That's not what we do.
Are you
It's
sure?
one of those things. I hate you. So it's one of those things. That's not what we do. We look at it and we're like, okay, we know that's a problem. We're working on these areas. We're very limited manpower. Like, we research it, we earmark it, and we're like, okay, we need to fix these things now, because now we've done the research, we've learned the engine, we've figured out how to do things. We're always learning. We're always innovating. We're always changing things. The engine's always changing every quarter from Fortnite and other games, because Cyberpunk just pushed some updates into our engine that we're going to contribute to for their streaming of worlds. Like their new open world game, Cyberpunk is working on The Witcher. So theoretically, everything kind of eventually comes back and trickles to the engine, and that we learn that, and then we're able to implement that. So it's one of those things where it's always like, okay, like we can do this now. Okay, we know how to fix that. We need to fix that. So it's one of those things where like, yeah, I know it might seem kind of slow. We're like, fuck, I want to play this right now. I want the co-op out right now. But we want to make sure this time around that we're solving the issues of the buses. We're solving the issues of the pathfinding and the move proxy system, where sometimes it worked this build, and then a level designer moved an actor, and now it's broken this build, because we didn't test every single bridge. So the move proxy system was error prone, extremely error prone. And then you think about it, it's not scalable for modding. Nobody at a modding standpoint wants to go in and be like, oh, I got to test every single pixel of every single area originating from one point to another point, because if the move proxy system is not set up for that exact use case, it's going to break, and you get the issues where the buses teleport and they go back and forth, back and forth. And I've gotten bug reports on the Steam forums. I've gotten Steam reviews, basically people saying that you can't play Calypso and do reliable evacuation in certain areas of the map, because they don't know what to do. So I just want to address that here and now, is that that's one of the things that we're doing this time around. So where that might be something that inflates the time, it makes it take a little bit longer. But at the end of the day, when we release co-op, when we get it out, it's meant to be finite. It's supposed to be done. It's not supposed to be a continuation of the last 3 to 4 years of development where it's like we're still meandering, we're still fixing the core, we're still adding legacy, basic systems. It needs to be firing in all calibers, all the mechanics need to be in, all the systems need to be in, and then we need to build on those. We need to build on those ideas. And some ideas are going to change, like that might be another thing that fucks us in March, is working with the community to tweak up civilian evacuation, because I get so many fucking posts on Steam, on reviews, on Discord of like, how the hell do I do civilian evacuation? You need a Venn diagram, and then you need an encyclopedia sometimes to figure out for an average user. Like, it makes sense from us, it makes sense for people that have played the game for years, but it's one of those things where it's like, that's something that could take a little bit longer for us to just ratchet it up a little bit and get it right this time around and work with the community, because we have all the pieces. We have everything there cognitively that people want, but it needs to be refined, and it needs to basically be visually conveyed to the end user more effectively when it comes down to how you set the operations and what they do. And like how Yamana will mention, it's some combinations of evacuations are noob traps, so they don't do anything. And like sitting down with people, and then so that'll be March. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I just want to make sure that people are clear that we're taking this in layers, and we're trying to address every criticism, every feedback point that we've gotten over the years of the infected are too easy. I want to customize the infected. The AI are stupid. Why do they keep stopping movements? Why do they get stuck on objects? The performance is dog shit. You name it. So if it seems like we're going slow at times, if it seems like technically is a lot of like mumble jumble of like what I talked about earlier for like us benchmarking and testing the 100v100, the 500v500, and then we're going to settle somewhere actually probably 120, 150 for Circ, 250 to 300 for infected, another 100 or so for the civilians, and then another 100 or so for the Fenrir. That's why we're constantly like testing, iterating, changing, tweaking, and doing research to just make sure that we're able to give you guys the best game you can get at the end of the day, and that we can make sure it's performant. So I went off on one of my spiels, Duravar. Let's start to wrap this up. So what other questions do we have?
Hang on, I'm talking.
I love Wish's fucking comment.
Will there be any more zombie types that can attack from high elevation, kind of like zombie version of a sniper that attacks from rooftops or
right now? That's the spitter. So I didn't touch on this, but I'll touch on it now briefly. Is that one of the things that I'm going to be doing? Is that when we get the co-op, when we get Circ more situated, I'm going to put in a basic rudimentary infected AI for testing on that co-op map. And one of the things that I'm going to be setting it up is the climbing. So spitters will actually become more deadly, because I'll actually just briefly show the map. So Dimitri made this very basic map, and it's our co-op test map that we're going to be using in the coming weeks once all of the core systems are in. And the idea is I had him just put together some moats over here, where when the infected come in, I was going to test their ability to run up the wall and replicate it, so that in their native AI, they would understand certain infected, if they're large enough, will just jump it. certain infected that are small, the weight class is heavy, like whatever. Like the standard infected would climb that. The spitter, I'll play around with the idea of them jumping because they're based off of a velociraptor and an alien anyway. So the idea is they're supposed to be very like fast. So we put in this moat, or whatever you'd call it, technically, or wall. And the idea was I'm going to be testing that for replication when we get to the kill-watt playtest, and I'll be sharing GIFs. I'll be sharing it on live streams when we get to that point. And then we put these in. Because what we wanted to do was we wanted to stress test the AI to where they would understand they can climb or jump over these objects or jump across objects to reach you quicker. Because one of the things we want to do with the infected is to make it to where they're more understanding of their environment. To where like they would understand that a spitter could jump over these objects to get to the other side instead of going around them. Little things like that would improve the gameplay loop and make it to where like you actually have to be more conscious of like, oh, that shipping container, you're not completely safe. I don't know why I pressed F11. Because theoretically a spitter could go up, and then hit you with acid from up here and spit at you. So that's one of the things that I'm going to be doing in this co-op playtest because the AI card is being handled in a microcosm here. And then when we get the pandemic, it'll be handled a little bit more. And then we'll do the AI lieutenant changes that are needed there as well. Again, if it bleeds over, it bleeds over. But I'll be always honest and transparent of why we're bleeding over. And that we'll get you guys a build that you can play. So even if it comes down to a situation in February and March where there are aspects that, yes, we're still taking a little bit longer, the moment we can get you something you can play, we will. So that way you guys can play amongst yourselves on experimental, and it can replace the legacy build. But it's not going to replace the legacy build till the vehicles are in, and the standard infantry in it, or the abilities are in, because then that way it's representative of like the final game. Maybe there's some bugs or some issues here and there, but it's a little bit more representative of what you guys are going to play in the final form. So I can start to give you guys something you can play actually tangibly. So I don't know why that's in the ground. Why'd they do that? So I guess Dimitri copied it and didn't actually align it. Let me see something. Yeah, I didn't align it to the ground. That's kawaii. So yeah, I'll have to go back and fix that. It's such a small thing, but it's whatever. It's a dev test map. So you guys are going to play this all serious. This is meant just to kind of be an obstacle course, per se, for us and for you guys to play test. Where the idea is that the infected would spawn in hordes out there, and they're just trying to build the first circ tent that you build. The moment you build a circ tent, you start the timer. And then everyone and their mama starts spawning in 30 seconds, and they never stop. And the idea is it's meant for us to benchmark combat and make sure everything's working before we scale up to the other maps. Pandemic Light, and then eventually full-on Pandemic going into March. So yeah, there's some hills here and like whatnot, and we're going to test that and just kind of get all that situated. So that will be great because then that will transition to what you're talking about for your question, where spitters can be on rooftops. You can build on rooftops because, well, that's the reason why we have that restriction is tech-wise, we could never figure out how to get them on the fucking rooftops reliably. So that's something we're going to work out and figure out here. And then we're going to scale up there. So then that way we can have it to where you can build your barracks on a rooftop. You can build your turrets on rooftops. And if they can tangibly see down, they will arc down and shoot said target. And you can make kill boxes that way. And you can build on the cargo containers if you can fit an engineer up there. Because that's one of the things we want to do is it's going to work both ways. Is that when we get it working for the standard infected, it'll work for the normal people. For they can climb and shurry their way up there. It might look a little silly to have a circ unit climbing a building. So we might end up having to have like a grapple hook or some other thing, but it'll work based off of the base implementation, and then we'll make it not look as silly as we develop and push those systems further. We're going to say anything, Chris? Age of
Empires. We notice how they just literally jump up onto
they do that
the
weird
walls.
Thing.
Yeah, it's like a 50-foot wall.
I don't know if they could figure it out or it wasn't a priority for them because we were playing that recently and we noticed that when you put your units on a wall, they don't have to go to like a central point in and out like Battle for Middle-earth 2 back in the day. Like you'd have like entry points and exit points for your walls. They would just go up on the wall at any given point along the area. But I think that's also because Age of Empires is more of a casual RTS game is what I feel like. So they just made that concession because they were like, fuck it. Like, it's not seen as like that hardcore, I guess you can say. Maybe I'm wrong for saying that, but I feel like Age of Empires is more of like a casual RTS. And then you have like Men of War, Company of Heroes, StarCraft that are seen as more of like hardcore, like intensive, micro, like competitive leagues stuff and all that.
Unless you're playing as Minsk, then you can just sit there and
Yeah, I hate whenever you play co-op. I play co-op with him on StarCraft 2, and literally he just plays Minx and just goes to fucking town. And I'm over there with Nova, sweaty as all hell.
Hey, I don't just artillery things or just play as Minsk. I also play
Tataka?
as what's his name?
Yeah, and I play as Kerrigan,
Tahaka.
Nova, and then I play as the couple. What's their name? I love their fucking
Hand and
group.
Horner.
Oh my god, they're so hybrid and so unique in terms of how they play. I love that group. They're so fun to play as. I think you bought me that as a gift. Yeah, he bought me that one as a gift for whatever reason because I was like, I can't afford it. And he was like, I'll get it for you, and I was like, oh, okay. So I think I bought you a game later on.
And I was just like, you did, yeah. You paid me back.
But legitimately, Hand and Horner are great. But yeah, like I love that kind of hybridization of video games. We do. We grinded it so hard it got boring. We made it like a mission almost, and we were min-maxing it too much to the point where the co-op got like too mundane, too repetitive. Because we were playing it for like 8-hour, 5-hour binges of like same mission, 20 to 30-minute run. Do that 6 times in a row, grind out XP in co-op. And it was like, shit, it's not fun anymore. We gamified it, basically, was the problem.
We gamified
the shit out of that. But anyhow, any other questions before we wrap it up? Because we're coming up on the 2-hour mark. We're definitely at 2 hours or 10 minutes. So we'll wrap it up. Any other questions on co-op? Any other questions or concerns? Anything hard? Any good questions, hard ones? I love those.
Will there be any
Wolfhound
place
has a
to
question.
damage mobs
Let me take his.
similar to State of the Cage?
Wolfhound.
Hang on, where is it?
So he asked the question: why is co-op a priority for adding the factions and any other major features? Isn't adding multiplayer the thing that will cause the most technical issues and usually saved for last in game development? The problem is that we'd have to rewrite entire aspects of the game. So why wouldn't we do that from the get-go? Take a little bit longer when we implement it, do it correctly, and give people what they want. It's one of those things where it was just basically like, with this rewrite, we deleted everything. We're starting over from zero. We're using the original code base and original things to inform design as a prototype, as a pseudocode. But it's one of those things where it was like, if we don't, certain things that you do in a single player game, you cannot do in a multiplayer game. Certain optimizations that you apply in a single player game don't carry over to a multiplayer game. So it's one of those things where we would write ourselves into a hole by going only on the single player and then have to spend 3 or 6 months refactoring the entire game, creating entirely new bugs just to make it fit multiplayer. So yes, I get exactly what you're saying. It's a lot of work. It adds a lot of time on. But in the grand scheme of things, it's basically investing long-term games over short-term in terms of like, yes, it does suck. It's a lot of 8-hour, 12-hour days for myself, but it needs to be done correctly, and done from a fundamental, foundational standpoint. So then that way we don't have to rework it. Because there were systems that we discovered in the last couple of weeks where we were like, we can't even do that in a multiplayer game. We can't use LOD-based movement component changes. We can't use LOD to basically change like the collision accuracy of units. We could do that in a single player game. But the moment you introduce multiplayer, you got 3 clients. Those 3 clients now need to be sent that data. And if one of those clients are lagging, bad ping, low frame rate, they're going to miss that update. You're going to get desync. And then you're going to get units off in Narya that basically are broken for the rest of the game. Or you just get like rubber banded. So yeah, I get it. It sucks. I know that you're frustrated that basically, yes, we're not doing factions. The number one thing everyone voted for. But part of doing Pierce and Natalie is doing it correctly. I did what you suggested 2 years ago. We put in Pierce and Natalie, and they were just a reskin of each other with no real consequence, no real replay value. They're just there and they just fought each other. They fought you, and they had like 3 variations of people, and they had 3 variations of weapons, and they were just surface layer born. And I thought to myself, this is shit. I took them out. They were put in the back burner. And we were like, okay, let's focus on getting what we have done, the core interaction between the Circ, the infected, dynamic civilian groups, use them as an incubator to build up the pipeline, build up the infrastructure, get them replicated, and with this new foundation per se. And then when we can use the dynamic civilian groups as they're replicated to be the stepping stone to 1.4, to do them correctly, do them quicker, and to be able to use the resources from the increased revenue from co-op to do the Pierce and Natalie faction correctly. Because I don't want to just put them in there as a reskinned dynamic civilian group. I want more nuance in them. I want diplomacy. I want interactions between the factions. I want Cirque to take a authoritative position of like he's going to vassalize and take protection of the civilians. I want Natalie to be on the fringes and kind of be a middle point like the GLA, where like they're more cloak and dagger and they're more like you don't really know what they're getting up to. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to do those systems to make sure they're done correctly and they're balanced, but then also giving them enough nuance of having unique vehicles and stuff. Because we had like in the original game design, Doc, there were 3 vehicles for each faction. They got a variation of a flying unit. They got a variation of a light unit. They got a variation of a heavy light ground unit, a heavy ground unit of vehicles. And I want to expand that. I want to have firefighters. I want to have medics. I want to have the police. I want to have beat cops. I want to have patrol cars. I want to have ambulances. For just to list some. And for Natalie, you know, tow trucks, technicals, modified technicals, buses, things that are augmented and tweaked. But I don't modified fire trucks, sure. But the idea, garbage trucks.
No, I say garbage
so
trucks.
It's one of those things where, like, if I do them, I want to do them with the intentionality and the attention to detail they deserve. And I feel that from the director's standpoint and understanding of just generally like how much these things are going to spend, cost, that I want to do it after co-op in 1.4. So then that way I can take all the extra money revenue we're going to get and I can reinvest that into campaign, into them, because they have to be done for the campaign regardless. They're a major pivoting part of the campaign, like in the in the book. So that's my plan. And again, I understand your concern. I understand your frustration. It's been an ongoing thing of like we've taken a long time to get to this point. And I feel like this is the best course of action based off of my resources and what I can do, kind of deal. So hopefully that answers your question and sets your concerns, resolves your concerns. And you're willing to kind of give us the benefit of the doubt to get to that point in 1.4 after co-op and resolve that and get it so that you're happy, and kind of deal. Yeah. So again, I just want to take that time because I hear that a lot. And I'm not an asshole. You know what I mean? I put these polls up for a reason. I talk to people for a reason. I want to know what people generally think. And as long as you're respectful and we can have a conversation, let's fucking do it. I don't care if you don't agree. Let's talk about stuff. So anyway, back to you, Derivar. 1 or 2 hard questions, then we'll wrap this up.
Thanks, Maggie. Let me just scroll back up and see if I can find some. That's actually a pretty good one. Where are the guns coming from?
Chris, you got this one.
That's a good lore one, that is.
Wow. I mean, the military works with them. So, I mean, the Cirque is a joint, is an organization that's both military and civilian. I mean, so they have basically the entire U.S. arsenal at their hands. I mean, what Cirque doesn't directly command, they can commandeer. Like they can tell basically the Air National Guard or the Coast Guard or whoever to support them and do what they want. That's how they can get access to like the Daisy Cutter or thermobaric bombs or bunker busters. Even though Cirque doesn't have that in their arsenal, they can call it up and use it whenever they need to. As for other weaponry, there's the stockpiles that the police have, and then there's like National Guard armory. There actually is an armory when you cross the Bay Bridge. You see it when you first get on the Bay Bridge. You'll notice there's National Guard armory down there. And so that's where a lot of civilians will be getting their weapons. And then just given the state of the world within the confines of the story, it's a lot more. It's like it's in the 90s where terrorism just kind of ran amok and biological and chemical weapons became the norm. Like dirty bombs did go off in the world. We've seen the U.S. start to stockpile across the country, large quantities of weapons and even confiscated weapons from various groups like the Crow Movement and then other radicals that are out there. We've only touched on like that kind of expansion lightly, but it's Sturk is like the last best desperate response to the country and the world kind of tearing itself apart.
Yes, and part of that is like again, like what Chris said, Cirque is basically a like new like a division agency that basically like combines civilian and military, and they can pull from anyone. And one of the things was like the civilians are getting theirs off of like raided gun stores, they're getting them off of like the armories, because after the Liberty Island gas attack, the government basically doubled down by putting caches, better weapons all over the country to basically arm local police and first responders if they need better ornaments, like in biological attacks. Now, obviously, they weren't taking into consideration a zombie virus. It was more for like anthrax or like the Crow Movement.
Like the Crow Movement.
But it was like retrofitted and it was stolen in some cases by civilians or correctly by the police or National Guard. And the idea is that's where the circumvention of weapons are getting across the board for the civilians to the police to Cirque. And again, Cirque can requisition wherever the hell they want because they have emergency powers from the Cepheus protocol. But the name of the game is the actual, I guess you can say, binding agreement between the U.S. president and the organization of they can enact Cepheus protocol, and that gives them control over everything. Local, yeah, they can do whatever they need to do to solve any kind of biological outbreak. And it's up to them at their own discretion if they need to enact Cepheus protocol. So in the book, it's enacted, I think, towards the end of the book.
No, it's not. The Hammer protocol is enacted. Cepheus will be the
end game. If they lose complete control, then they enact Cepheus protocol. But then everything else is like small little like tidbits of like, okay, we have local jurisdiction, we can do these things, but Cepheus protocol in itself is dropping a thermobatic bomb and killing everyone. And then like the precursors to that is their total control over local and federal. But yeah, because they can tell the mayor or anyone, like in the book, they can tell the mayor what to do. Like, you're going to do this, you're going to close off these streets, you're going to do whatever we say because we're coming in and we're taking control of the situation, like the feds do to local police. So it's like that kind of deal. Anyhow, so one more question, Derivar, hard one. Do we have anything like super duper hard, like the dragon one, where it's like, Wolfhound?
Yeah, when we added dragons to the game.
That's like
when we added dragons.
Modders.
When we added dragons.
Modders. I'm just gonna say modding. Yeah. You had your
modding. No, why?
Your goddamn dragons.
Can you add like an infected
goddamn Gundams in the mods? I don't care. You could turn the assault into a goddamn Gundam. I don't care.
Dragons from Cirque. Yeah, that's a modified infected crow.
I'll get Wolfhound's question super fast where Derivar finds something like super hard to wrap it up. But basically, we talked about this in the beginning of January, where we were like, if we were to do that, we could do it. We could make it to where you can play as the infected right now. And we could do it, but the problem is that would increase the amount of work for replication and everything else and would blow all of our timelines by double. So we were like, okay, we've never done this before. Like right now, if I were to turn off the faction check, I can issue the infected orders. I can tell him to go around and do stuff, and he works. But the problem is that you figure there's the UI, there's the abilities, There's like the gameplay loop. There's the building from the structures. So it's one of those things where we're like, okay, let's not bite off more than we can chew. Let's focus on the circ, focus on the interaction with the infected, the civilians, and get the faction stuff done. And then in 1.6, after we leave early access, that's something that we could look into. Because
Or on
like a Heart of the Swarm update, where the idea would be is that we take a section after the game is released and we key in and we focus on the infected and make it to where, okay, you can now play as the infected against the circ, and you can play as the infected in co-op. And then you can basically, what am I thinking of? You can essentially have it to where, what is it? Because like basically there's going to be aspects of it, like we're turning the blow up guy into an ability. We're turning the spitter spit into abilities. So the framework, the runtime, the wrappers that are required to make them inoperable so a player could use them is going to be there, but there's a lot more systems that go into play to make sure everything works and making a proper circ AI. So when we get to March, we're going to be writing we're going to be implementing, they're already implementing, we're going to be extending our faction managers. And our faction managers are going to have a derived main class that's going to be how the infected think and operate, how circ think and operate, how the civilians think and operate, how personality will think and operate. And the idea is we're going to write a high-level function flow of how they expand their zone, how they expand other zones, how they upgrade zones. And we're going to prototype that for the Chelsea AI for Pandemic. And then the idea is that what we learn and what we develop there can be extended to circ. Because the biggest concern for us is making sure circ actually is like an actual threat, an actual AI faction that can work and operate. So by writing that rule set, that framework for infected, then in the future, we could write a mode for the faction manager, for the AI, for the circ, so that way they can know how to play the game. And that way you can switch over to the infected and it just works. And all we have to do is just spend the time a week or a couple weeks overwriting that underlying top level code of how they operate from the infected variation to the circ variation, and then spending that time just making the UI for the infected and making it to where you can.
Yes, circ can't play like zombies. They have to play like they're another
like,
player.
So we're taking it on this is a long-term investment. We're taking it where like basically we see the infected, the Fenrir, and circ as playable factions. The three amigos, the three triages of like Fenrir is the Protoss, the circ is Terran, the infected are Zerg. You know, that kind of like the three pillars of like each one plays distinctly different. Each one has their pros and cons, and because we don't have the financing of a multi-million-dollar team like StarCraft, we have to take it of like let's focus on circ. And this rebuild. Let's make sure when we build it this time around, it's easier to extend for those other factions. I don't see PvP in the cards for a long time because of the technical issues that I talked about, but the goal would be regardless is the co-op. If we can make a breakthrough when we get to it, we won't know the potential for PvP until we get the co-op out. And then we basically sit down and we figure out like, okay, like if we were to do PvP, is it possible? How would we do it? And what are the technical hurdles we're going to have to get over? And that might change. But for right now, we're going with the idea there's no PvP and everything is the co-op. And you're either playing all as a circ, all as the infected, all as the Fenrir, and everyone else is AI controlled. And that could change. But as it stands right now, I'm not going to set any expectations just yet. But yeah, these are long-term goals. And in the early access 1.0 thing, it's only circ and everything on the roadmap. The civilian stuff, the Pearson Natalie, and world events, and that's what we're marketing for like the 1.0, leaving early access, and then everything else is speculative, and we're going to take it in layers as we go, as we support the game, over years of building it up. Because this is more of a generational game where like, it sticks to layers. Layers has been around for 10 years at this point. You know, so it's one of those things where we see it as like a long-term engagement. And even if we start working on other projects, which we definitely would in the next couple of years, Cepheus would always be our baby that we come back every quarter, every couple of quarters to keep putting in content after the 1.0 release. Yeah, so that's it. That's everything I got. One more question, Duravar, and we're done. We're going to wrap it. Did you find one? A hard one? Was he dead? Maybe his mom ate him.
Will there be a persistent research between games matches or a ranked system?
Persistence. Like a leaderboard?
No. Persistent
Persistent
research.
research. What does he mean by that? He means like, so if I understand correctly, are you
Research
talking
thing.
like if you leave from one player's game to another player's game, your research goes over to that game? Is it only for the
I think
operators?
so. Yeah.
The only
Persistent research.
the only
From one game
persistent
to another.
thing in the game as it stands right now is the operators. And that would basically be like, so campaign is going to have persistency. Pandemic is persistent only for the session, the world, the game you're playing in that save file. Operator is persistent across everything. And that's the current game plan as it stands. Because then you figure the idea that you can bring operators into your friends' games and you can have your level and your abilities and you can help them, like build. You can have an engineer operator that already can build all the stuff or whatever. So then that way you don't have to worry about relying on his engineers. You can just go in and build a base for him while the RTS player is still learning the basics of how to control units and fight. So that's what we had planned there. I think that pretty much wraps it up, right, Derver?
I think so. I don't see any more.
Yeah,
a lot of
I
good
love the
questions
questions. I love
today.
the hard
I think we
questions.
hit the
Like,
2 hour.
I appreciate you guys coming and sharing your criticism and telling us what you think and being honest.
Always be
For
cake.
the other question that we got earlier about like not agreeing with what I'm saying, so we can have a conversation. I thank you guys all for coming to the podcast. We'll be here next week. I'll do a better job of posting on the Steam. I got overwhelmed on Friday night, and then I slept in. I stayed up all night programming. So you figure I will just cut it at 7 to 8 p.m. on Fridays, make the Steam post, do the YouTube thing, so you guys can actually see and know the event's going to happen. And then if I can, I'll go back to programming. Otherwise, I'll go to sleep. So I actually wake up early. And if you guys want to support the team, check out our Patreon. Check out the book on Amazon, maybe. Check out potentially the support packs on Steam. There's a bunch of ways different supporting the team. We appreciate it. They help. Tell your games about the game. God, I hate Google. Shut up. And basically, yeah. Thank you guys so much for coming here, and we will see you guys next week. And we appreciate you guys.
Did you see what Apotheosis just said? Robert, I demand a good night